GCam can add new features or give you a better version of features than the pre-installed camera app on your phone. But what about slow motion video? Is GCam the best for that? To answer that question, you have to find a reliable port of GCam that doesn't crash when filming in slow motion. I ended up trying 3 versions on my Poco F3. 2 crashed every time I began a slow-mo recording, so I used a port suggested in an excellent comment for my last GCam video, and it never crashed. By the way, feel free to check out my GCam install video right here if you need some help getting started. GCam normally films at 30 FPS, and for slow motion video, you can film at 1/4 speed and 1/8 speed, which equals 120 frames per second and 240 frames per second. Those are standard slow motion speeds across most camera apps. The real negative is that GCam only films slow motion at a resolution of 1280 by 720, when other apps let you film at the larger 1920 by 1080 or full HD resolution. So I looked for another free camera app that would film slow motion in full HD, and I found FilmicPro, which works pretty well and allows you to increase the video bitrate, unlike GCam. I also tested out the stock camera app that comes pre-installed on the Poco F3 just for comparison. I tested each app at 120 FPS and 240 FPS. Feel free to pause the video to compare frames. Each app performs well with the lighter test. Maybe FilmicPro looks a bit better than the other two. The drone test really shows how poor GCam's footage looks since it's at a lower resolution. Just check out that fabric the drone's sitting on. The falling block test, I know, it's a great test name, reveals another issue with GCam: stuttering, especially at 240 FPS. For the spray bottle test, I'd say the stock camera wins. Based on these tests, I would avoid GCam for slow motion video, and both FilmicPro and the stock camera app are good choices. But are there any other apps that might do a better job? Before I answer that, if you're enjoying this video, please give it a like real quick. Thank you for that. I think Filmic Pro might be able to beat the other apps. It costs $14.99 US, and it's been around for quite a while. Like FilmicPro, it allows you to change the bitrate, shoot at slow motion in full HD at 240 FPS and 120 FPS, but it goes a step further by theoretically giving you control of the shutter speed and ISO. And shutter speed is important for slow motion video, since it allows you to change the amount of motion blur in the shot. Unfortunately, on my Poco F3, the shutter speed and ISO were tied and couldn't be adjusted separately, meaning I couldn't film with a high shutter speed and high ISO. But that might just be a problem on the Poco F3. With GCam removed from the test, we start with the lighter test again, and all 3 perform well. I'd say it's a 3-way tie for best quality. The drone test doesn't really show any major differences either, but no stuttering or big flaws. Finally, the perfectly named falling block test. I know, it's a great test name. Makes it pretty clear that Filmic Pro is filming at a higher shutter speed than the other 2 apps. Just look at the blur from FilmicPro and the stock camera compared to Filmic Pro. For this test at 240 FPS, there was some stuttering from Filmic Pro, but this was the only time I found any stuttering in any of my Filmic Pro test shots. So what's the conclusion then? I'd say GCam is probably not your best bet for slow motion video, especially on the Poco F3. GCam records at a lower resolution, at a lower bitrate, with stuttering, although it does support an anti-banding or anti-flicker setting that adjusts the shutter in relation to 50 Hz or 60 Hz flickering from light sources or TVs. FilmicPro is a good alternative that records at full HD with multiple bit rates that are higher than the stock camera and GCam. The stock Poco camera does well too, and even allows you to record full HD at 960 FPS, but it's kind of tricky to catch the right moment since the recording time is very short. I think Filmic Pro does come out on top since it films in full HD with higher bit rates than open cameras, and it has an adjustable shutter speed, even though that feature is a bit buggy on the Poco F3. 3 things to note. This was only a slow motion test. All of these camera apps do a lot more than slow-mo, so don't judge the entire app off of just this one feature. Also, the fact that FilmicPro and Filmic Pro allow you to change the bitrate really is a huge deal. If you plan on editing your slow-mo footage, I would definitely suggest filming with one of these apps, since that extra visual data can really help when color correcting or color grading in editing software. Lastly, I just tested one device, so some of these results may be unique to the Poco F3, since different phones can access different features of these apps. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment below with any slow-mo questions, and I will answer them perfectly.